Hi, my name is Amber Beckley. I'm an associate professor of criminology at Stockholm University. And today I'm going to talk to you about foreign background and crime. And this is part of a study I did that appears in a chapter in the book Det svenska tillståndet, edited by Amir Rostami Jerzy Sarnecki. In this study, I, along with my colleagues Johan Kardell and Manne Gerell, looked at crime that was happening in areas rather than who was committing crime. If you're at all familiar with research on people with a foreign background in crime, our results might surprise you. If you're not familiar with that research, however, let me start off by giving you a little bit of background. So this topic, it must be said, is full of some controversy. Some people have questioned whether we should even be looking at foreign background in crime. Will this type of research serve to counteract or reinforce stereotypes? It's our position that this type of research is important for our understanding of crime in society and also how we can prevent crime. Moreover, as I'll show you next, the controversy behind this research really lies in contrast to a long established body of research evidence. So here's an example of overrepresentation in criminal conviction among men born abroad. And I'm just showing you men right now because the types of crimes I'm going to talk about are more often committed by men than women. But in this example, which was adapted from an article by Olof Beckman and colleagues, we can see that men who are born abroad were, since the 1970s, 1.5 times to 2.5 times more likely to be convicted of crime than men born in Sweden to Swedish-born parents. So this result has generally been shown across multiple other studies conducted at different times, using different samples, using different methods, looking at different types of crime, and even defining foreign background in different ways. So given this evidence, we don't think there's really much controversial about this line of research. The next bit of thing you might think about when we talk about foreign background and crime is vulnerable areas. Vulnerable areas, or utsatta områden, are areas that have been defined by the police as having high levels of crime, along with some kind of socioeconomic vulnerability and also some kind of criminal influence. Some research has shown that areas are more likely to be defined as vulnerable when they have a higher proportion of people from a foreign background. So given the evidence on these vulnerable areas and the risk that an area will be defined as vulnerable if there are people of a foreign background, and this other long body of evidence showing that people of a foreign background are overrepresented in crime, we may suspect that crime across all of Sweden would be associated with people of a foreign background. But that would be incorrect for a couple of reasons. First of all, if we're thinking of vulnerable areas, there are only 61 of those across all of Sweden. And you can see that they're in the bottom third of the country. Second, when we think about who is committing crime, we're only talking about the known offenders. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg of all of crime in society. We have a lot of crimes that are reported but go unsolved. And we also have a significant number of crimes that are never reported and go unsolved. So in our research, when we were trying to understand foreign background and crime and how that could relate to crime in areas, we zoomed out and we tried to get a little lower on the iceberg by looking at reported crimes, both solved and unsolved. So how did we do this across all of Sweden? Well, we first generated a map of Sweden, and then we divided the map up into small squares, which we called pixels. These pixels were 250 meters by 250 meters, or about the size of 9 to 10 football fields. There were about 110,000 pixels across all of Sweden. Here's an example of a pixelated map of Malmö, and this map shows the crime of public assault. On this map, you can see that the darker pixels represent higher public assaults reported to the police. And in these areas where the pixels are darker, they're sort of in the center of the city where we have entertainment areas, things like bars, restaurants, nightclubs, theaters. And there's also some other areas on this map that aren't pixelated at all, bodies of water and farmlands. Those areas across all of Sweden never got pixels. So we only pixelated areas that had people in them. So how can we describe the pixels across all of Sweden? Well, the first thing we started off by doing was creating sort of categories of people of a foreign background and how we could think of those in terms of the representation of people in these pixels. And so we came up with 5 different categories for percent of people born outside of Sweden. They ranged from pixels with no one born outside of Sweden to pixels where everyone was born outside of Sweden. Our next step was then counting the number of each type of pixel that was in Sweden. And so we went ahead and did that. And what we found was that over half of the pixels had 25% or fewer of the population born outside of Sweden. In contrast, about 10% of the pixels, or roughly 10,000 pixels, had a population where 60% or greater was born outside of Sweden. The last thing we did when we were trying to understand these pixels was we looked at how many people were in each pixel on average. And we did this because usually if there's more people in an area, there's more crime in an area. And even crime rates can be higher. So what we saw here was that the pixels looked a little different in terms of how many people were in the pixels. Pixels without a whole lot of people born abroad had few people in them, whereas in contrast, the pixels with many people born abroad had quite a lot. So just to recap that, what we saw was that in pixels where there were roughly 0 to 25% of the population who had a foreign background, they were not very densely populated areas. They were maybe smaller, likely rural areas. In contrast, in pixels where 60 to 99% of the population was born abroad, they were sort of densely populated pixels where they were maybe more urban areas, urban environments. So our next step then was to look at crime across these areas. Now, we looked at what we called public crimes, and this was 7 different types of crime. They included vandalism, narcotics crimes, theft, bicycle theft, public assault, robbery, and assault of a peace officer. So if we look at all of the different types of crimes together, what we can see here is that there is sort of this upward trend that as the percent of people born outside of Sweden increases in a pixel, on average, the number of reported crimes goes up as well. And here we see that in pixels in which 60 to 99% of the population was born outside of Sweden, there were roughly 10 crimes reported to police in a year. And this was year 2018. So I'm going to break this figure down a little bit and look at a few different types of crimes, just to show you what that looks like. I'm going to talk about the crimes of vandalism and narcotics crimes, and I point those 2 out because those are 2 of the most common types of crime. And then I take a look at the violent crimes of assault and robbery. Those were the 2 most prevalent violent crimes. So if we look at the crime of vandalism, we see a similar pattern to what we saw across all types of crime, that we see this upward slope with a peak of crime occurring around pixels where there were 60 to 99% of the population was born outside of Sweden. And we see, on average, those pixels reported maybe roughly 3 crimes per year. We see a similar result when we look at narcotics crimes. The peak comes about at 3 crimes per year among pixels where 60 to 99% of the population was born outside of Sweden. If we go next to the crime of public assault, we see a lot fewer crimes being reported in general. Similar pattern here happening with the slight peak among people, among pixels where 60 to 99% of the population was born outside of Sweden, but we're down to about less than one crime reported per year on average in these pixels. And when we go to the crime of robbery, we see even fewer offenses being reported. And again, maybe there's this slight discernible peak among the population, among the pixels, where 60 to 99% of the population is born outside of Sweden. But we're talking about, on average, less than 1/3 of a crime reported per pixel per year. So we thought, okay, well, we see some pattern here between the percent of people born outside of Sweden and the number of reported crimes. But what's happening off on this end? What's happening with the pixels where everyone is born outside of Sweden? Why aren't we seeing a consistent trend upwards if people of a foreign background really are important for understanding why crime varies across Sweden? Well, you might recall that we did consider the number of people living in each pixel. And if you do remember, the pixels that were not very densely populated tended to have very few people born outside of Sweden, or all of the people born outside of Sweden. In contrast, these pixels where between 25 and 99% of the population was born outside of Sweden, those were the more densely populated, likely urban pixels. So what happened when we did some more sophisticated modeling? Well, what we found was that it wasn't so much who was living in pixels, but the number of people that were living in the pixels. That is, the population density of the area seemed to have a much stronger effect in explaining how crime changed across Sweden, as opposed to the percent of people that were foreign-born in each pixel. So just to sum up, we found that yes, indeed, the more people of a foreign background that were in a pixel, the more reported crime there was, up to a certain point. But that wasn't really what was sort of driving maybe the differences in crime between pixels. Instead, we found that it's really these sort of differences in how many people are living in each area. Of course, there's a lot we still don't know about crime. We don't know about that whole bottom part of the iceberg. And if we really want to start understanding and getting a really solid grasp of crime throughout society and how best to prevent it, we need to get at that bottom part of the iceberg. That's all for me today. I thank you for listening, and here's my contact information if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.